To learn simple English, start by reading classic fairy tales like Puss in Boots by Charles Perrault. This story follows a clever cat who uses his wit to win a fortune for his master. Focus on the main events and new words. Read the story multiple times, and try to retell it in your own words to improve your vocabulary and confidence. Consistency is key, so try to practice a little every day. The story begins with a poor miller who dies and leaves his belongings to his 3 sons. The oldest son received the mill, the second son got the donkey, and the youngest son was left with only the cat. The youngest son was very unhappy with his small inheritance. He complained, "My brothers can work together and make a living, but what can I do with a cat? I suppose I will have to eat him and use his fur for a mitten. Then I will have nothing left." The cat, hearing this, spoke to his master. He said, "Do not worry, master. Just give me a bag and a pair of boots made for a cat, and you will see that your inheritance is not so bad after all." The son was very surprised to hear a cat speak, but he had little to lose. He had seen the cat perform many clever tricks before, so he decided to trust him. He took the cat to a bootmaker and had a special pair of boots made for him. Once he had his new boots in a bag, the cat, now known as Puss in Boots, went straight to work. He went to a field where there were many rabbits. He put some bran and lettuce in his bag and laid down, pretending to be dead. Soon, a foolish young rabbit, attracted by the smell of the food, hopped into the bag. Puss in Boots quickly pulled the strings tight and caught the rabbit. Proud of his catch, he went directly to the king's palace. He asked to speak with the king and was brought before the throne. Puss in Boots bowed low and said, "Your Majesty, I bring you a gift from my master, the Marquis of Carabas." He had made up this noble title for his master on the spot. The king was pleased with the gift of the fine rabbit and told the cat to thank his master. For the next few months, Puss in Boots continued this routine. He would often catch partridges or other game and present them to the king, always in the name of the Marquis of Carabas. The king grew quite fond of these regular gifts and became curious about this mysterious Marquis. One day, Puss in Boots learned that the king was planning to take a drive along the riverbank with his daughter, who was known to be the most beautiful princess in the world. The clever cat ran to his master and said, "Master, if you follow my advice, your fortune is made. You must go and bathe in the river at the spot I show you. Leave the rest to me." The youngest son, though confused, did as the cat told him. While he was bathing in the river, the king's grand carriage came into view. As the royal carriage approached, Puss in Boots began to shout with all his might, "Help! Help! The Marquis of Carabas is drowning." The king heard the cries and recognized the cat who had brought him so many gifts. He immediately ordered his guards to rescue the Marquis. While the young man was being pulled from the river, Puss in Boots explained to the king that some thieves had stolen his master's clothes while he was bathing. This was, of course, a lie. The clever cat had simply hidden the old clothes under a large stone. The king, feeling responsible for the Marquis's safety on his lands, ordered his attendants to fetch one of the finest suits from his own royal wardrobe for the young man. Dressed in these splendid clothes, the miller's son looked like a true nobleman. The princess saw him and thought he was very handsome, and he in turn fell in love with her at first sight. The king was so impressed by the Marquis of Carabas that he invited him to join them in the carriage. Puss in Boots was delighted to see his plan working perfectly. He ran on ahead of the carriage, filled with new and daring ideas. He came across some peasants mowing a meadow and told them, "Good people, the king is coming this way. If he asks ye who owns this meadow, you must say that it belongs to the Marquis of Carabas. If you do not, you will all be chopped into little pieces." The peasants were terrified by the fierce-looking cat and promised to obey. When the king's carriage passed by, the king asked who owned the beautiful meadow. "It belongs to the Marquis of Carabas, your Majesty," they all replied in unison. The king was very impressed with the Marquis's vast lands. Puss in Boots continued to run ahead, saying the same thing to everyone he met. He told reapers in a wheat field and workers in a vineyard that their land belonged to the Marquis of Carabas. threatening them all if they said otherwise. Each time the king's carriage passed, the king marveled at the great wealth of his new acquaintance. Finally, Puss in Boots arrived at a magnificent castle. This castle, and all the lands the king had just seen, actually belonged to a fearsome ogre, the richest in the country. The cat, having learned about the ogre's special abilities, bravely walked up to the castle gate and asked to speak with its master. The ogre received him as politely as an ogre could and invited him to sit down. The cat began to flatter the ogre. "I have been told," said Puss in Boots, "that you have the amazing ability to change yourself into any kind of creature you wish. You can become a lion or an elephant, for example." The ogre, proud of his powers, replied, "That is true. And to prove it, you will now see me become a lion." Puss in Boots was so frightened by the sight of the huge lion before him that he scrambled up the curtains, which was not easy in his boots. Once the ogre had changed back to his normal form, the cat came down and admitted he had been very scared. "Furthermore," the cat continued cunningly, "I have also heard that you can change yourself into the smallest of animals, like a rat or a mouse. I must confess, I find that impossible to believe." The ogre, annoyed that his power was being doubted, cried out, "Impossible? You shall see!" In an instant, he transformed himself into a tiny mouse scurrying across the floor. This was the moment Puss in Boots had been waiting for. He pounced on the mouse and ate him all up. Just then, the king's carriage arrived at the ogre's castle. Puss in Boots ran out to meet them, bowing low. "Welcome, your majesty, to the castle of the Marquis of Carabas," he announced. The king was astonished. "What? Does this magnificent castle also belong to you, Marquis?" he exclaimed. The young man, now the lord of the castle, simply offered his arm to the princess and led her inside. They entered a grand hall where a splendid feast was laid out, which the ogre had prepared for some friends who were expected later that day. The king, completely charmed by the Marquis's personality and his apparent vast wealth, turned to him and said, "It is clear to me, my dear Marquis, that you are the perfect match for my daughter. If you will have her, you shall be my son-in-law." The Marquis of Carabas accepted the offer with a deep bow. That very same day, he and the princess were married. Puss in Boots became a great lord in his own right and lived in comfort and happiness, no longer having to chase mice except for his own amusement.